Hey everybody, Shane from Shane's Books and Review, and I hope that you are having a wonderful day. And as promised, here we go. It is the Bobiverse
by Dennis E. Tyler.
The Bobiverse, as it is a book that is about Robert, quote, Bob Johansson. And this individual ends up, well, let's just be frank about it. He ends up going to a convention and watches some talks about things that could happen in the future with probes and self-replicating AI and all this kind of a thing. He was either just finishing his deal, or he had just finished his deal and left the convention, called his family, and then as he walked out, splat, he gets killed. It was a very convenient thing, especially for the writer, not so much for Bob. Now, how do I view this book? It is a enjoyable read. It really is. It's actually quite fun. I would call it lighthearted though. It doesn't have a lot of the hard science type things that you would find in Isaac Asimov. But that's okay, because if every book was that way, it would be highly boring. Where do we even begin? Bob has some dilemmas. One, he wakes up, and whenever he wakes up after his splat, he can't really move his eyebrows or smile or anything else. He can only pretty well focus on things with his eyes and look around, but not really move his head. And come to find out, he, as an entity, has been purchased by a company and is now in a competition to become something, but they won't tell him what it is. This book can be divided out into several different parts. You've got the part where he's in the lab learning his new abilities as a AI that is hooked up through a interface to control other computers or robots as it is. Then you've got this secondary point where he escapes the Earth and goes kind of where he's supposed to go in a way. And then there's the last part that was actually two pieces where he's fighting with one of the other probes and he discovers life. Then he also has the human dilemma as well. So we'll talk about the first movement of the book first, I guess. That was kind of interesting for me. Being a tech person, that's really what I do a lot. Some of the things that they were talking about, thankfully they did not go on about this type of technology or that kind of technology. They just kind of came up with their own and named it, which makes it a little bit timeless, which is good. Because anytime anybody writes a book, and if they go on about a Intel Core Duo as the best thing available, you're instantly going to be dated within 3 months. I think most people have learned that now, but I'm really glad that that wasn't the case with this. All the terminology was fairly generic but purposeful. I don't mean generic in a bad way here, I mean it in a great way. Bob is brought up to speed. We find out that the world population is about the same, but there's been some major changes in dogma and pragmatic beliefs. Some factions that think that AI goes against the greater creation of all, and it should be absolutely abolished because it is creating life. You've got other factions that just don't care. They just want it for military. And then you've got other factions, it seems, that are just the usual hotheads that don't care about anything, including themselves, and just want to blow it all up. And in the writings, this was evidenced by one of the attacks where Bob actually participated in protecting the facility that he was in, using his interface and the little robots to run around and cause havoc and chaos, while the actual defenders of the base were able to take advantage. But we also had some things that were fairly thought-provoking. You know, if this was something that was truly possible and they were able to put somebody into a box, the only mortality that they would really have is if what they're in gets destroyed, which was kind of a scary point for him. Bob didn't like that idea. And then whenever he found out that his main facility was blown and they brought a backup, that backup was indeed the probe he was going to be in, its computer. So he had to wait to get shipped and put into said probe. Some of the more comical things that were in the front end of the book was him getting used to being a computer whenever he realized that he actually is just a program, and the way that the person that was bringing him up to speed on everything around him continuously switched him off in his perception, but was only merely transferring him from station A to station B. I did find the use of flashbacks maybe a little bit much for the first part of the first book, but I also feel like it was justified at the same time, because without those flashbacks where some things were explained, then some of it might not have been so congruous. It might not have flowed as well. The second part was kind of oddish to me, not so much because it wouldn't be possible. I mean, it is fiction, and even with today's technologies, some aspects of what was wrote would actually be possible by some computer programs right now, which is kind of cool. It was just the luck. There was so much luck. Bob's a lucky little dude. And to be frank, if it was a real life situation and I was in that real life situation, I probably would have got blown up. I did like the second part of the book for a couple of reasons as well, and those will become obvious if you read it. It had to do with him exploring his favorite planet before he actually took off on his journey, and little Sandbox Bob. He's an awesome little character. Which kind of brings me to an interesting point. If you were an AI and you were really only limited by the hardware that was hosting you, how far could you take it? I'm pretty sure that Bob has took it as far as it could be took, but without that background in software engineering and general computer use, most people wouldn't have had that idea to create a virtual interface for him to live within. Was it needed? No. But it enriches the story, and if Bob was an actual person, AI instance, versus something that was just wrote in page, it more than likely would have helped out a lot with the sanity levels as well. Now, once he leaves our solar system and goes to a different place than where everybody else, he ends up running into another probe. Now, he did the calculations, he figured it out. He knew he'd be there at least 30 days early, so he would have enough time to set up some defenses, but play a decent game of home protection by the time that the other probe got there. In between the Buster missiles that he comes up with, and having no military background whatsoever, but having to tactically figure out the situation to defeat somebody else, that was a fairly interesting part as well. The problem of self within this. It's not that he has an issue or that Bob was a weakly wrote character. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, Bob was a very well wrote character. The problem therein lays, if you were, try to put yourself into the shoes of that character, right? If you were a AI and you are yourself, you've always been yourself. The one thing on the road that you can always rely upon is you and nothing else. If you were that type of an individual and a bit of a loner and all that kind of thing, how copacetic would you be with the idea of copying your entirety to another device and another and another? And this brings up a writing box where somebody could have got it easily stuck into a corner. But as is with most analogs, whenever Bob copies himself, there's differences, discrepancies here, additions there. So even though Bob is the same individual amongst all these different vessels, there's actually different Bobs. Some are a little bit more loner, some are more technically minded, some are more industrial minded, some have a greater sense of humor, and some are very macabre. And the writer said it really well whenever Bob was thinking to himself about this whole situation in the way of a narrative, albeit a "you're coming with me" narrative. But what if I am a jerk? What if I don't like myself whenever I meet myself in the other machine? Some of the characters, they had to come up with their own names because Bob was like, I want to be the only Bob, and in fact, the oldest Bob in any given place will be the Bob in control. Very simple rule, but it keeps it so that the original Bob can override any other Bob in the system. And he also put forth a decree that they would all have to name themselves again, so that he would be the only Bob. And so that opened it up. They gave us Homer, which at first I was like, what's an Odyssey have to do with this? Eventually we have a Bart, but it's not the same Bart. And one of the things that were more true to life that I rather found myself enjoying was the discrepancies and differences in between each version of himself. The more extreme that they seemed, it seemed like the better they would get along with each other. Now, once the other probe, which I won't tell you where it came from, was destroyed, Bob goes on another small mission after completing his first part of Build More Bobs, and ends up finding more probes that he has to destroy. And then whenever they go to the area of Alpha Centauri, he finds more there as well. And there's one probe that ends up being more of a pain in the butt than the others, and that really doesn't get resolved by the end of book 1. I am kind of hoping it does in book 2. Because I would really like to see more of the discovery, the different planets, the different things that he's running into, and the problem solving of the book. Now, on to the third part, which is actually the biggest part to me. And now that's my idea of the way it was divided might be differently than others, but that's okay. Everybody's got a valid point and a valid opinion. However, the third part to me was whenever he discovers that humanity ran to the brink and humanity's real lack of wanting to cooperate to survive. And then these new creatures, the Deltans, that he finds in another place altogether. But he, as Riker, which was number 2, and Homer, they end up handling humanity fairly well, it seems. Getting everybody to kind of unite. Making the order of who's going to go on what ship and where. And trying to terraform a planet to bring its atmosphere up so it can be warmer. But of course we have delegates, and whenever Bob tries to make himself to be known to them, they end up clubbing his drones down or beating the communication devices that he has sent to a pulp or refusing to talk altogether. But eventually everybody starts to come together. And of course there's a lot of political type stuff in that part of this faction wants this faction wants this. And he's like, can you not just self-regulate? That would be cool. Thanks. There was also a point where the Faith faction, which was actually responsible for building him and his probe and sending them out, tries to use some varied type commands that they had put into him to make him comply with their wishes of them getting to get on a boat first and get off the Earth. But of course, that's where Sandbox Bob comes into play in the first part of the book, and Riker gets completely underwhelmed by that situation altogether. Now, by the very end of the book, it seems like things might be coming together. There's actually 2 Exodus ships that are sent off towards Vulcan or Romulus, and it appears that things are going fairly well for Riker and for Homer. As far as the Deltans go, it's definitely an interesting little idea that he had found another intelligent life. Moreover, his mingling with them. But it does bring up a very valid point. If other life was found and they weren't to our technological ability yet, how far should we really mingle with them? Yes, it would be nice to say, no, we should never interfere and just watch and see what happens. But then again, I see where Bob was coming from in this. Can completely relate. But it's a trial and error situation. And he's kind of making the rules up as he goes. And that particular Bob seems to have separation anxiety issues, because as soon as the thought crosses his mind that his counterpart Marvin is going to take off, he starts to find himself a little depressed about it. I do have to say that between the Bobs, Riker and Homer seem to be the ones that I favor, simply because they work well together and they're really good at that problem solving. There's this odd probe that you will get to meet from Australia. That was kind of fun. Now, what kind of a read is it? Is this one of those reads that maybe you should pick up over the weekend or just maybe in the evenings, or is it a long read? It's not really a long read at all. It's typical, but I think that if you're technical minded and just a little bit, or if you enjoy sci-fi just a little bit, that you'll find yourself going through the book fairly quickly. It's that time. You've done it. You made it to the end. Awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate it. If you happen to find a good read in between now and the next video, do let me know about it, because I'd love to read it along with you guys, as evidenced by this video. One of the subscribers to the channel had mentioned that we check out the Bobiverse, and so we have. I want to thank that person, because I probably would not have picked this book up. I know you're not supposed to judge a book by the covers. Quite frankly, it didn't really seem like it'd be that kind of a book that I would enjoy, and there's a lot of different smaller elements that are really big in the grand scheme of things that tie everything together, that are really, it was well thought out. That's my point, well thought out. If you happen to be new to the family, make sure that you hit that subscribe button and the bell, because as we all know now, there's different levels of the bell, so check your cowbell, make sure you got all turned on, because after all, we all need a little bit more cowbell in our life. And, oh, there's so many ands these days, isn't there? I'm going to see if I can't check out the second book and possibly the third book before I get back into Sherlock. Now, I got to get down the road, but hope you guys have a great weekend. And until next time, this has been Shane with Shane's Books and Review.